She sent her location by mistake, unaware of what it would unleash. Minutes later, the sound of a helicopter's blades shook the avenue. A millionaire was descending from the aircraft, searching for someone. And what happened next, no one could have anticipated. The sky over Mexico City was beginning to turn orange as Aline Moreau sat on a bench along Reforma Avenue, her gaze fixed on the cracked screen of her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled up, rereading the same conversation over and over. "I'm sorry, I can't lend you anything this time. I'm short on cash, maybe next month. I just paid rent. I'm completely broke." The responses piled up, all similar, all excuses. Aline took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears threatening to spill. The notification from her banking app blinked. 230 pesos. That was all she had left after sending money to her parents in San Miguel de Allende. She couldn't ask them to return it. Their pension barely covered their medications. "Miss, we're closing." The security guard's voice startled her. "Yes, I'm leaving," Aline replied, gathering her worn-out bag and the folder containing her resume. 5 interviews in 3 days, 5 rejections. And now, as she walked down the avenue, her landlady's call echoed in her mind. "Pay tomorrow or pack your things." The restaurant where she worked had shut down without warning, leaving her with a month's unpaid wages that never arrived. A thunderclap rumbled in the sky. Perfect, she thought with bitter irony. Rain would be the final touch to this disastrous day. She opened her phone again and, in a last desperate attempt, typed a message to Laura, an old college friend she'd recently reconnected with. "Laura, I lost my job. I can't pay rent, and tomorrow I'll be evicted from my apartment. I'm on Reforma, near the Angel. If you could help me with a place to stay for the night, or lend me something, I'd pay you back as soon as I find a job." She attached her location and hit send. The app showed a loading circle spinning, until an error message appeared. "Number does not exist." Aline frowned. She must have mistyped the number, or Laura had changed her phone. In her desperation, she hadn't checked who she was sending the message to. The first drops of rain began to fall. Marcos Ashford was idly gazing out the window of his office on the 40th floor of the Reforma Tower. The city stretched out below him like a tapestry of lights starting to blur in the rain. His assistant had left hours ago, leaving him alone with a stack of contracts he needed to review by morning. At 33, Marcos had multiplied the family fortune, turning Ashford Investments into one of Latin America's most prominent business groups. His face graced the covers of business magazines. His name appeared on lists of eligible bachelors. Yet, as he contemplated the city from above, he felt an emptiness that neither his Polanco penthouse nor his collection of luxury cars could fill. The sound of his personal phone snapped him out of his thoughts. A message from an unknown number. Normally, he ignored them, but something, perhaps boredom or a strange intuition, prompted him to open it. "Laura, I lost my job. I can't pay rent, and tomorrow I'll be evicted from my apartment. I'm on Reforma, near the Angel. If you could help me with a place to stay for the night, or lend me something, I'd pay you back as soon as I find a job." There was a location attached. Marcos frowned. The message clearly wasn't meant for him. He was about to ignore it when something in the tone of desperation struck him as unsettlingly familiar. He recalled his own beginnings before the wealth, when his father lost everything, and they had to start from scratch. The sleepless nights, the uncertainty. He glanced at the clock. 7:25 p.m. The contracts could wait. Without overthinking it, he grabbed his jacket and car keys. As he rode down in the private elevator, he wondered what the hell he was doing. Going to meet a stranger because of a misdirected message? It was madness. And yet he kept going. The rain was intensifying. Aline had taken shelter under the awning of a closed cafe, hugging herself to fend off the cold. Her phone showed 7% battery. She tried contacting others, but no one responded. She felt invisible, as if the entire city had forgotten her. A black Aston Martin pulled up in front of her. The car, completely out of place in that area at that hour, caught her attention. The window rolled down slowly, revealing the face of a man Aline recognized instantly. She'd seen him on magazine covers, in economic news. "Did you send a message asking for help?" he asked in a deep voice that didn't quite match the uncertainty of his words. Aline stepped back instinctively. How had her message reached Marcos Asford? It was impossible. "I think there was a mistake," she murmured, confusion evident on her rain-soaked face. Marcos studied her closely. She wasn't what he'd expected. Her simple clothes were drenched, her brown hair plastered to her cheeks, and her eyes. There was something in those eyes that completely disarmed him. "Get in," he said, opening the passenger door. "It's raining." "I don't get into strangers' cars," Aline replied, though the alternative was staying in the rain. "You just sent me a message asking for help," he pointed out. "It was a mistake. It wasn't meant for you." "And who was it for?" "For a friend, Laura." "Well, Laura's not here. I am." Aline hesitated. The situation was absurd. Of all the wrong numbers in the world, she'd sent her cry for help to a Millionaire's. "Can I give you money for a taxi if you prefer?" Marcos offered, noticing her discomfort. "I don't want your money," she replied with a dignity that surprised him. "The message was a mistake. I'm sorry for bothering you." Marcos should have driven away then, handed her the taxi fare, and left. But something about the way she stood her ground, despite being soaked and visibly distressed, intrigued him. "Where are you going to spend the night?" he asked. Aline fell silent. She had no answer for that. "I know a cafe nearby," he said, switching tactics. "We can talk there in public. No strings attached." The rain intensified as if to underscore the offer. Aline glanced at her phone. 5% battery. Her options were dwindling along with those numbers. "A cafe," she repeated, as if setting conditions. "Just that." Marcos nodded, and she finally climbed into the car, clutching her bag tightly against her chest like a shield. The interior of the Aston Martin was another world. Fine leather, polished wood, the soft purr of the engine. Aline felt like an intruder, dripping rainwater onto upholstery that probably cost more than everything she owned. "I'm Marcos, by the way," he said, breaking the silence as he drove. "I know who you are," she replied, staring out the window. "Aline Moreau. How did your message end up on my phone, Aline?" She shrugged. "I must have mistyped the number." "Of all the wrong numbers, mine," he commented with a half-smile. "Murphy's Law," she replied, allowing herself a small smile. The cafe was nearly empty when they arrived, a small, elegant place with dim lights and jazz playing in the background. The kind of spot Aline would have considered prohibitively expensive in her current situation. They sat at a secluded table. Aline still felt out of place in her damp clothes and disheveled appearance. Marcos, on the other hand, seemed to fit perfectly in his impeccable suit, despite having been under the same rain. "What do you want to drink?" he asked. "A coffee's fine." "Are you hungry?" She was about to deny it, but her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. "I'll take that as a yes," Marcos said, signaling the waiter. "Bring us 2 house specials and 2 coffees, please." When the waiter left, Aline sat up straighter, uncomfortable with the situation. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said finally. "You got a wrong message, and now you're here buying me dinner." "Why?" Marcos studied her for a moment, as if searching for the answer himself. "Honestly, I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because I haven't done anything impulsive in a long time. Maybe because your message sounded genuinely desperate." "I don't need pity," she shot back quickly. "It's not pity," he replied. "It's curiosity. Curiosity about the kind of person who sends a cry for help and then rejects assistance when it's offered." Aline met his gaze for the first time since they'd entered the cafe. His eyes were intense, a deep blue that contrasted with his perfectly styled black hair. "I didn't reject your help," she said. "I rejected getting into a stranger's car." Reasonable, he conceded. "And now we're in a public place, having coffee. It's different." The waiter returned with 2 plates of pasta and the coffees. The aroma made Aline's stomach protest again. "Go ahead," Marcos encouraged. "It'll get cold." Aline began eating, trying to maintain her composure despite her hunger. As she did, Marcos watched her with a mix of curiosity and something else she couldn't quite define. "Can I ask what happened?" he said finally. "With your job." Aline swallowed a bite before answering. The restaurant where I worked closed overnight. The owner just vanished with the money, including our last month's wages. And you can't report it? We tried, but the place was registered under a shell company. There's no one to hold accountable. How long have you been out of work? 3 weeks, she replied, taking a sip of coffee. I've had some interviews, but nothing concrete. What kind of work are you looking for? Anything. Right now, I'm an administrative assistant with customer service experience, but I'd take anything. Marcos nodded thoughtfully. I have contacts. Could I help you find something? Aline set her fork down on the plate. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Because I can, he replied simply, and because you seem like someone who deserves a chance. She looked at him suspiciously. I'm not looking for favors that come with strings attached. Marcos let out a genuine laugh, the first of the night. I'm not asking for anything in return, Aline. Contrary to what you might think of men with money, some of us just want to help. That hasn't been my experience, she murmured. A silence settled between them as they continued eating. The rain pounded against the cafe's windows, creating an almost romantic backdrop for a situation that was anything but. Or at least, that's what Aline kept telling herself. And your family? Marcos asked, breaking the silence that had settled. Aline looked up from her nearly empty plate. My parents live in San Miguel de Allende, a small town, but I guess you know it. I've been there a few times. Marcos nodded. It's beautiful. It is. A genuine smile lit up Aline's face for the first time. My father worked his whole life in a shoe factory. Now he's retired, but their pension barely covers their expenses. Do you send them money? She nodded, taking another sip of coffee. Every month. It's not much, but it helps with their medications and some bills. Marcos watched her with growing interest. It wasn't the story he'd expected to hear. No tragedy or exaggerated drama, just the everyday reality of millions of Mexicans. Hard work, sacrifice, and the constant struggle against a system that rarely rewarded honest effort. What about you? She asked, surprising him. Your family. Marcos smiled with a hint of irony. My father passed away 5 years ago. My mother lives in Madrid now. I have a sister in New York. I'm sorry about your father, she said sincerely. It was a long time ago, he replied, though the loss still lingered. We never got along well. He had very specific expectations about what I should do. And did you meet them? On paper, yes. I multiplied the family fortune, but he wanted a more traditional heir, less focus on innovation, more on maintaining the status quo. Aline looked at him with curiosity. She hadn't expected a man like Marcos Ashford to share family conflicts with a stranger. It's funny, she commented. From the outside, you seem to have it all figured out. Appearances can be deceiving, he replied, leaning back in his chair. Everyone thinks money solves everything. Well, it solves a lot of things. Aline shot back with an ironic smile. Like not worrying about where you'll sleep tonight. Marcos nodded, aware of the privilege implied in his comment. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. I'm just saying everyone has their problems, but some problems are more urgent than others. The waiter approached to clear the plates. When he left, Marcos leaned forward. Where are you staying tonight? The question brought Aline back to the reality she'd managed to forget for a moment. Her expression darkened. I don't know, she admitted. I have some options. Like what? Which ones? Aline fell silent. She had no real options, and they both knew it. I can book you a hotel room, he offered. I don't need your charity, she replied automatically. It's not charity, it's a loan, Marcos clarified. You'll pay me back when you can. Aline looked at him skeptically. Why would you do that for a stranger? Marcos took a moment before answering. Because someone did it for me once. You, the great Marcos Ashford, needed help? There was disbelief in her voice. I wasn't always who I am now, he explained. My father lost almost everything when I was 17. A bad deal, risky investments. We were practically on the street. Surprise flashed across Aline's face. But your name, your company. My father managed to recover years later. but for a time, we depended on the kindness of others. A family friend lent us their guest house for 6 months. I never forgot that gesture. Aline stayed silent, processing this new information that contradicted everything she thought she knew about him. A hotel for a few days, Marcos continued. Just until you find a job. No strings attached. She took a deep breath. Her pride battled with practical necessity. Finally, reality won out. All right, she agreed, but I'll pay you back every peso. I don't doubt it, he smiled. You have my number now, after all. For the first time that night, they both laughed naturally. The initial tension had dissipated, giving way to something neither of them expected, a strange sense of connection. As Marcos paid the bill, Aline took the chance to plug her phone into an outlet by their table. The battery had dropped to 2%. Ready? He asked when he returned. Aline unplugged her phone, which had barely climbed to 10%. Thank you for dinner, she said sincerely. You didn't have to do that. It's been a pleasure, he replied, and by his tone, Aline knew it wasn't just politeness. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind that distinct smell of wet earth that, for a moment, made you forget the city's pollution. They walked to the car in comfortable silence. I know a hotel nearby, Marcos commented as he opened the passenger door for her. It's not luxurious, but it's clean and safe. Sounds perfect, Aline replied, feeling more at ease in his presence. During the drive, Aline gazed out the window at the city. The lights, people heading home, the nightlife beginning to stir. Mexico City, always in motion, unstoppable like time itself. How long have you lived here? Marcos asked. 6 years, she replied. I came to study business administration at UNAM. Did you finish? I'm 2 semesters short. I had to start working full-time when my father retired early due to back problems. Marcos nodded without commenting. There was no pity in his gaze, something Aline deeply appreciated. The hotel was just as he described, modest but decent, located on a quiet street near the Roma neighborhood. Marcos parked in front of the entrance. I'll walk you in to check in, he said, turning off the engine. At the reception, Marcos spoke briefly with a clerk, while Aline waited a few steps away. She noticed how the employee nodded deferentially, clearly impressed by who was standing before him. Marcos handed over his credit card and signed something. All set, he said, returning to her. Room 307, booked for a week. A week? Aline asked, surprised. I said I'd take a couple of nights. A week will give you enough time to get organized, he insisted. Besides, it's already paid for. Aline wanted to protest, but the day's exhaustion was catching up with her. Thank you, she said simply. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, he replied, handing her the key. Do you need me to pick up your things from your apartment? I don't have much, honestly. Just some clothes and a few documents. I can get them tomorrow. I can drive you if you want. Aline looked at him with a mix of gratitude and confusion. Why do you keep helping me? You've already done more than enough. Marcos smiled, and for a moment, Aline glimpsed a man behind a millionaire. Someone far more complex than what magazines and newspapers portrayed. Maybe because it's been a long time since I felt truly useful, he confessed. Or maybe because there's something about you that intrigues me. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. There was an unexpected connection between them, something that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. I should go up, Aline said, breaking the moment. It's been a long day. Of course, Marcos nodded. Can I give you my number? The real one, not the one you got by accident. Aline smiled and pulled out her phone. Marcos dictated his number, and she saved it. I'll call you tomorrow, he said, to see if you need help with your things. Thank you, Marcos, for everything. He nodded, and after a brief goodbye, Aline headed to the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw Marcos still standing in the lobby, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. The room was simple but cozy. A single bed, a small desk, a clean bathroom. For Aline, after the day she'd had, it felt like a palace. She collapsed onto the bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. Her phone buzzed. A message. Rest well. Tomorrow's a new day. Marcos. Aline smiled, feeling an inexplicable warmth spread through her chest. She typed a reply. Thank you for showing up when I needed it most. She left the phone charging and headed to the bathroom. As the hot water cascaded over her body, she mentally reviewed the day's events. She'd lost her job, was on the verge of losing her home, and yet, by some twist of fate, she'd ended up dining with one of the richest and most influential men in the country. Life had a strange sense of humor. In bed, with the lights off, Aline stared at the ceiling. What would happen tomorrow? Would she see Marcos again, or would the magic of this night fade with the daylight? Part of her feared it was all a dream, that she'd wake up in her apartment with the same problems and without the near-miraculous intervention of this stranger who'd responded to a message sent by mistake. Her last thought before succumbing to sleep was of her parents. She needed to find a job soon. She couldn't let them down. Meanwhile, miles away in his Chapultepec penthouse, Marcos asked for a gaze of the city lights with a glass of whiskey in hand. The contracts he was supposed to review remained untouched on his desk. His mind was occupied by the image of determined eyes and a reluctant smile. For the first time in a long time, he felt he'd done something real, something that mattered. And that feeling, more than any business deal or multimillion-dollar acquisition, filled him with satisfaction he thought he'd forgotten. He picked up his phone and looked at Aline's message again. There was something about her, an authenticity, an inner strength that had captivated him from the first moment. It wasn't just her natural beauty, but something deeper, more substantial. Until tomorrow, Aline, he thought as he set the glass down and headed to his room. That night, both slept better than they had in a long time. The sound of a notification woke Aline. The light streaming through the curtains indicated it was mid-morning. She sat up, disoriented, taking a few seconds to remember where she was and why. The hotel, Marcos Ashford, the mistaken message that had changed the course of her night. She grabbed her phone. 10:45 a.m. She never slept this late, but accumulated exhaustion had taken its toll. There were 2 new messages. Good morning. I hope you rested well. What time should I pick you up to get your things? Marcos. The second message had arrived just minutes ago. I have a meeting at 2 p.m., but I'm free until then. Let me know when you're ready. Aline stared at the screen, still processing the reality of what had happened the previous night. It hadn't been a dream. Marcos Ashford had really shown up in response to her mistaken message, taken her to dinner, and paid for a week at a hotel. She typed a quick reply. Good morning. Just woke up. I can be ready in an hour. Thank you again. The response came almost instantly. Perfect. I'll pick you up at 12. Have some breakfast. There's a cafe downstairs. The bill's covered. Aline frowned. She was uncomfortable relying so much on someone, especially a stranger, but her situation left her with few alternatives. Besides, there was something about Marcos, an unexpected authenticity, that made her feel his help was genuine. She showered quickly and went down to a hotel cafe. As she ate breakfast, she mentally reviewed what she needed to retrieve from her apartment. She didn't have much. Some clothes, important documents, a couple of sentimental books, and a small collection of ceramics she'd inherited from her grandmother. Everything else could be replaced eventually. At 11:55, Marcos walked into the cafe. He was dressed more casually than the night before, dark jeans, a blue shirt, and a light jacket. Even so, his presence drew the attention of everyone in the room. Good morning, he greeted, sitting across from her. Slept well. Aline nodded, suddenly aware of her appearance. She was wearing the same clothes as the day before and had barely managed to tame her hair. Yes, thank you. I didn't realize how tired I was. Marco smiled, and Aline noticed how his eyes lit up when he did. A detail the magazine photos had never captured properly. Ready to go to your apartment? Yes, she replied, finishing her coffee. I'd rather not run into my landlady if possible. What time is she usually around? Usually in the afternoon. Mornings, she goes shopping or visits her sister. Then we're in luck, Marco said. Standing up, let's go. The drive to Aline's apartment passed in comfortable silence. She gazed out the window. still processing the contrast between the luxury of Marcos's car and the increasingly modest neighborhoods they passed through. "Here," she said when they arrived at a 4-story building on a narrow street in the doctor's neighborhood. 3rd floor. Marcos parked in front of the building. The neighborhood wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't the kind of place where an Aston Martin went unnoticed. "Want me to come up with you?" he asked. "If you don't mind waiting here," she replied. "It'll be faster if I go alone." "As you wish. I'll keep my phone handy if you need help." Aline nodded and got out of the car. As she climbed the stairs, the elevator had been out of service for months. She mentally reviewed what she needed to pack. Reaching her floor, she froze. The door to her apartment was slightly ajar. Cautiously, Aline approached. She could hear noises inside. She pushed the door open gently and came face to face with her landlady, Mrs. Gutierrez, who was inspecting her belongings. "What are you doing?" Aline asked, a mix of surprise and indignation in her voice. Mrs. Gutierrez jumped but quickly regained her authoritative stance. "I told you today was the last day," she replied curtly. "I'm seeing what's worth keeping to cover the 2 months you owe me." "I owe you 1.5 months, not 2, Aline corrected, stepping into the apartment. "And you have no right to come in here and go through my things." "It's my property," the woman shot back. "And I'm tired of your promises. I'll pay you next week, Mrs. Gutierrez." "Just wait until I get paid, Mrs. Gutierrez. I have bills to pay, too." Aline took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. There was no point arguing. She just wanted to grab her things and leave. "I came to get my belongings. I'm leaving today." "And my money?" the landlady insisted. "I'll pay what I owe you," Aline assured her. "But I need time to find a job." Mrs. Gutierrez let out a sarcastic laugh. "Sure, like everyone else. Meanwhile, I keep waiting." Aline pulled a suitcase from the closet and began packing her clothes, ignoring the landlady's comments. She was focused on the task when a familiar voice came from the doorway. "Everything okay here?" Both women turned to find Marcos, standing in the threshold. His presence filled the small space, instantly shifting the dynamic of the situation. "Who are you?" Mrs. Gutierrez asked, her tone softening slightly. "A friend of Aline's," Marcos replied, stepping into the apartment and assessing the situation with a glance. "I came to help her with her things." Mrs. Gutierrez sized Marcos up, from his obviously expensive clothes to his designer watch. Her attitude changed immediately. "The young lady owes me 2 months' rent," she said, now addressing him. "Almost 10,000 pesos. 1.5 months. Aline corrected again, zipping the suitcase with more force than necessary. Marcos watched the exchange with interest. Without a word, he pulled out his wallet and extracted several bills. "Here's 15,000 pesos, he said, handing the money to the landlady. "That covers the debt and a little extra for the trouble." Mrs. Gutierrez's eyes widened. Thank you, sir," she stammered, quickly pocketing the money. "Miss Moreau has always been an excellent tenant, just lately." "I'm sure she has," Marcos interrupted politely. "Would you mind letting us finish packing her things?" The landlady nodded and, after one last curious glance at Aline, left the apartment. When they were alone, Aline turned to Marcos with a mix of gratitude and frustration. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to. Besides, now you owe me 15,000 pesos more. Your debt to me is growing by the minute." He said it with a smile that made it impossible for Aline to keep a serious face. Finally, she smiled too. "At this rate, I'll be working for you for decades." "Could be an interesting arrangement," he commented, his eyes sparkling with a humor Aline was starting to appreciate. They continued packing in a much more relaxed atmosphere. The small apartment held few personal belongings, some books, framed photos, the mentioned ceramic collection carefully wrapped in newspaper. "Is this everything?" Marcos asked when they finished, looking at the suitcase and 3 medium-sized boxes. "Yes," Aline confirmed. "I've never been too attached to material things." "It shows," he remarked, but there was no judgment in his voice, just observation. "These photos are of your parents." Aline nodded, approaching where Marcos held a frame with a picture of a smiling couple in front of a modest white-walled house. In San Miguel. It's the house I grew up in. They look happy, Marcos observed. They are in their own way, Aline replied with a nostalgic smile. They worked their whole lives to give me an education, opportunities they never had. And that's why you left university, to help them. It wasn't a question. Anyone would have done the same. Marcos looked at her with an intensity that made her feel momentarily vulnerable. No, Aline, not anyone would have done that. There was a charged silence, heavy with something neither dared to name. Finally, Marcos broke the spell. We should go. I have that meeting in a couple of hours. Together, they carried Aline's belongings to the car. As Marcos drove back to the hotel, she gazed one last time at the neighborhood that had been her home for the past 3 years. She felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. What are you thinking about? Marcos asked, noticing her silence. How fast things can change, she replied. Yesterday at this time, I was desperate, not knowing where I'd sleep. And now, Aline looked at him. Now I'm still jobless and in massive debt, but at least I have a roof over my head for a week. And I have to admit, the company's not bad. Marcos smiled at the veiled compliment. The company's excellent, actually, he replied. They arrived at the hotel and brought Aline's belongings up to her room. As they organized the boxes, Marcos checked his watch. I have to go soon, he said with evident reluctance. But first, I wanted to propose something. Aline looked at him expectantly. There's an opening at my company, Marcos continued, an administrative assistant position in the HR department. The salary's good, and I think you'd be perfect for it. Marcos, Before you say anything, he interrupted, it's not a favor. We genuinely need someone with experience in administration and customer service. You'd have to go through the selection process like any other candidate, but I can get you an interview. Aline considered it for a moment. Part of her wanted to reject the offer out of pride, but the more pragmatic part recognized it was exactly what she needed. All right, she agreed finally. I'll take the interview, but I wanted to be clear that if I'm not the right candidate, I'll understand completely. I wouldn't expect less, Marco smiled. I'll send you the details this afternoon. They looked at each other for a moment. Neither wanted to end the encounter. Thank you, Marcos, Aline said finally, for everything. Don't thank me yet, he replied. Wait until you see if you get the job. With those words and one last smile, Marco said goodbye. Aline was left alone in the hotel room, surrounded by the boxes containing her entire material life. She picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. Mom, she said when they answered. It's me, Aline. Yes, I'm okay. Actually, I think things are getting better. I have a lot to tell you. The next 3 days passed in an odd calm for Aline. She organized her belongings in the hotel room, updated her resume, and meticulously prepared for her interview at Asford Investments. Marcos had sent her all the necessary information, job description, requirements, and even some tips about the personality of the HR director who would interview her. During that time, they communicated mostly through messages. Marcos was busy with meetings and short trips to Monterey, but he always found a moment to check in on her or send a comment that made her smile. It was strange how, in such a short time, his messages had become the highlight of her day. The morning of the interview, Aline woke before dawn. She dressed in her only formal outfit, a black pencil skirt, a white blouse, and a navy blazer she bought on sale 2 years ago. It wasn't designer, but it was well-tailored and gave her a professional look. She applied minimal makeup and pulled her hair into a low bun. Her phone buzzed with a message. Good luck today, though you won't need it. Be yourself. That's more than enough. Marcos. Aline smiled, feeling a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with interview nerves. Thanks. I won't let you down, she replied. The response came almost instantly. It's not about me. It's your opportunity. Seize it. There was something about the way Marco supported her, without pressuring her, that felt deeply comforting. He didn't treat her like a charity case, but as someone he genuinely believed in. The Ashford Investments building loomed imposingly in the heart of the financial district, a glass and steel tower reflecting the city sky, a symbol of the economic power it represented. Aline took a deep breath before stepping through the revolving doors. In the past few days, she researched everything she could about the company. Its origins 3 generations ago, its evolution under Marcos' leadership, the innovative projects they'd recently implemented. "Good morning. I have an interview at 10 with Mrs. Ramirez," she announced at reception. "My name is Aline Moreau." The receptionist checked her computer and nodded. "Of course, Miss Moreau. Floor 25, HR department. They're expecting you." The elevator whisked her to the indicated floor. Upon exiting, a young assistant greeted her and led her through an open-plan office to a conference room with panoramic city views. "Mrs. Ramirez will be with you shortly," the assistant said, offering her water. "Would you like anything while you wait?" "I'm fine, thank you," Aline replied, trying to control her nerves. When the door closed behind the assistant, Aline took the chance to observe the space. It was elegant yet functional, with a large dark wood table and ergonomic chairs. Framed photos lined the walls, company projects, iconic buildings, opening ceremonies. In one, she recognized a younger Marcos, standing beside an older man with the same distinguished bearing. By the similarity in their features, she assumed it was his father. The image showed the ribbon cutting for what seemed to be the very tower she was in now. Both were smiling for the cameras, but Aline noticed a subtle tension in Marcos' eyes. Her observations were interrupted when the door opened again, admitting a middle-aged woman, impeccably dressed, with a serious but not hostile expression. "Miss Moreau, I'm Patricia Ramirez, HR Director," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "Pleasure to meet you," Aline replied, shaking her hand firmly. The interview began formally. Patricia reviewed her resume, asked about her previous experiences, her skills with various software, and her ability to work under pressure. Aline answered honestly and clearly, highlighting her achievements without exaggeration. "I see you didn't complete your degree," Patricia noted. "May I ask why?" "Family reasons," Aline explained. "My father had to retire early and my family's income dropped. I decided to work full-time to help support them financially." "I understand," Patricia nodded, making a note. "And you haven't considered finishing it?" "It's definitely something I want to do eventually," Aline replied. "In fact, it's one of the reasons I'm seeking job stability. A steady job would let me plan and possibly resume my studies in the future." The response seemed to satisfy Patricia, who moved on to increasingly specific questions about hypothetical work scenarios. Aline felt the interview was going well, but Patricia's neutral expression was hard to read. Finally, Patricia closed her folder and looked at her directly. "I have to ask you a direct question, Miss Moreau, and I'd appreciate your honesty. How did you meet Mr. Ashford?" The question caught Aline off guard. She hadn't expected it to come up so explicitly. "It was a coincidence, really," she replied, sticking as close to the truth as possible. "I sent a message to a wrong number during a difficult moment, and it turned out to be his." Patricia watched her with renewed interest. "And he offered you this job directly?" "He told me about the opening and offered me the chance to interview," Aline admitted. "But he made it clear I'd have to go through the same process as any other candidate." Patricia nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty. Mr. Ashford mentioned something similar when he informed me of your candidacy." There was a brief silence. Aline could feel the interview nearing its end, and that her answer to the next question might be crucial. "One last thing, Miss Moreau. Why should we hire you over other candidates with more experience or completed degrees?" Aline took a deep breath. It was the question she'd been anticipating. "Because I work tirelessly for what matters to me," she replied with conviction. "I've shown I can sacrifice my own interests for my family's well-being, and I bring that same loyalty and dedication to this company. I don't have a complete university degree. That's true, but I have real experience, adaptability, and above all, a genuine desire to grow professionally here. I'm not just looking for a job, Mrs. Ramirez. I'm looking for a place where I can develop and contribute meaningfully." The response seemed to make an impact on Patricia, whose expression softened slightly. "Well, Miss Moreau," she said, standing up, It's been a very interesting interview. Thank you for your time and honesty. We'll be in touch in the coming days. Aline left the building with mixed feelings. She thought the interview had gone well, but the direct mention of Marcos had thrown her off. She didn't want anyone to think she was there only because of personal connections. As she waited for the metro, her phone buzzed with a message. How did it go? Marcos. Aline hesitated before replying. She didn't want to seem dependent on his approval, but she couldn't ignore his genuine interest either. I think it went well. Mrs. Ramirez is intimidating but fair. She mentioned you told her about my candidacy. The response took a few minutes. Patricia's excellent at her job. She values honesty above all. And yes, I told her how we met. I didn't want any secrets. Aline smiled, appreciating his transparency. Thanks for that. When do you think I'll hear back? Usually takes a week, but I promise the process will be completely impartial. I told you that from the start. I know, and I appreciate it. As the metro carried her back to the hotel, Aline reflected on the twist her life had taken in just 4 days. From being on the brink of homelessness to having a potential job opportunity at one of the country's most prestigious companies, all because of a message sent to the wrong number. What surprised her most, however, wasn't the change in her circumstances, but the change in herself. There was something about the faith Marcos placed in her that made her believe in her own abilities in a new way, as if someone had turned on a light that had been off for a long time. That night, as she ate dinner at the small restaurant next to the hotel, her phone rang. It wasn't a message this time, but a call. Marcos' name appeared on the screen. "Hello," she answered, her heart inexplicably racing. "Hi, Aline." Marcos' voice was warm on the other end. "Are you busy?" "I'm eating dinner, but nothing important. Patricia called me a few minutes ago," he said, getting straight to the point. "I wanted to give you the news myself." Aline held her breath. So soon? And why was Marcos calling instead of Patricia? "They're offering you the job," he continued, and Aline could hear the smile in his voice. "You'd start Monday." For a moment, Aline was speechless. Joy and relief flooded her chest, creating an overwhelming sensation. That's wonderful," she managed to say finally. "Really? So soon?" Patricia wanted to do more interviews, but apparently you impressed her. She said you showed refreshing authenticity. Her exact words. Aline smiled broadly. Grateful Marcos couldn't see the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you accept for starters," he suggested with humor. "Of course I accept." There was a brief silence, charged with unspoken emotions. "We should celebrate," Marcos said finally. "Are you free tomorrow night?" Aline's heart skipped a beat. Was this a personal invitation, or just a kind gesture from a boss to a new employee? "Yes, I'm free," she replied, trying to keep her tone casual. "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 8. I know a place you'll love." When the call ended, Aline stared at her phone with an uncontainable smile. Not only had she landed a job that would let her help her parents and possibly resume her studies, but tomorrow she'd have a date with a man who, in just 4 days, had managed to awaken feelings she thought she'd forgotten. Because it was a date, wasn't it? The way Marcos had suggested it, the tone of his voice, yet doubts began to creep in. He was her boss now, technically. Was it inappropriate? And what would people say? A girl without a completed degree, from humble origins, going out with a millionaire CEO after landing a job at his company. The perfect setup for misunderstandings and rumors. But as she finished her dinner, Aline decided she didn't care. For the first time in a long time, she felt something good, something genuine was beginning in her life, and she wasn't going to let it slip away because of fear or insecurities. Aline had never been indecisive about her wardrobe. Practicality had always taken precedence in her life, and her limited closet offered few options to debate. But that night, her bed was covered with the few clothes she owned as she stared critically at herself in the bathroom mirror. Was this a date? Marcos hadn't specified, and she feared misinterpreting the situation. "Miss Moreau, I'm Patricia Ramirez, HR Director." She introduced herself, extending her hand. "Pleasure to meet you," Aline replied, shaking her hand firmly. The interview began formally. Patricia reviewed her resume, asked about her previous experiences, her skills with various software, and her ability to work under pressure. Aline answered honestly and clearly, highlighting her achievements without exaggeration. I see you didn't complete your degree, Patricia noted. May I ask why? Family reasons, Aline explained. My father had to retire early, and my family's income dropped. I decided to work full-time to help support them financially. I understand, Patricia nodded, making a note. And you haven't considered finishing it? It's definitely something I want to do eventually, Aline replied. In fact, it's one of the reasons I'm seeking job stability. A steady job would let me plan and possibly resume my studies in the future. The response seemed to satisfy Patricia, who moved on to increasingly specific questions about hypothetical work scenarios. Aline felt the interview was going well, but Patricia's neutral expression was hard to read. Finally, Patricia closed her folder and looked at her directly. I have to ask you a direct question, Miss Moreau, and I'd appreciate your honesty. How did you meet Mr. Ashford? The question caught Aline off guard. She hadn't expected it to come up so explicitly. It was a coincidence, really, she replied, sticking as close to the truth as possible. I sent a message to a wrong number during a difficult moment, and it turned out to be his. Patricia watched her with renewed interest. And he offered you this job directly? He told me about the opening and offered me the chance to interview, Aline admitted, but he made it clear I'd have to go through the same process as any other candidate. Patricia nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty. Mr. Ashford mentioned something similar when he informed me of your candidacy. There was a brief silence. Aline could feel the interview nearing its end, and that her answer to the next question might be crucial. One last thing, Miss Moreau. Why should we hire you over other candidates with more experience or completed degrees? Aline took a deep breath. It was the question she'd been anticipating. Because I work tirelessly for what matters to me, she replied with conviction. I've shown I can sacrifice my own interests for my family's well-being, and I bring that same loyalty and dedication to this company. I don't have a complete university degree. That's true, but I have real experience, adaptability, and above all, a genuine desire to grow professionally here. I'm not just looking for a job, Mrs. Ramirez. I'm looking for a place where I can develop and contribute meaningfully. The response seemed to make an impact on Patricia, whose expression softened slightly. Well, Miss Moreau, she said, standing up, it's been a very interesting interview. Thank you for your time and honesty. We'll be in touch in the coming days. Aline left the building with mixed feelings. She thought the interview had gone well, but the direct mention of Marcos had thrown her off. She didn't want anyone to think she was there only because of personal connections. As she waited for the metro, her phone buzzed with a message. How did it go? Marcos. Aline hesitated before replying. She didn't want to seem dependent on his approval, but she couldn't ignore his genuine interest either. I think it went well. Mrs. Ramirez is intimidating but fair. She mentioned you'd told her about my candidacy. The response took a few minutes. Patricia's excellent at her job. She values honesty above all. And yes, I told her how we met. I didn't want any secrets. Aline smiled, appreciating his transparency. Thanks for that. When do you think I'll hear back? Usually takes a week, but I promise the process will be completely impartial. I told you that from the start. I know, and I appreciate it. As the metro carried her back to the hotel, Aline reflected on the twist her life had taken in just 4 days. From being on the brink of homelessness to having a potential job opportunity at one of the country's most prestigious companies, all because of a message sent to the wrong number. What surprised her most, however, wasn't the change in her circumstances, but the change in herself. There was something about the faith Marcos placed in her that made her believe in her own abilities in a new way, as if someone had turned on a light that had been off for a long time. That night, as she ate dinner at the small restaurant next to the hotel, her phone rang. It wasn't a message this time, but a call. Marcos' name appeared on the screen. Hello, she answered, her heart inexplicably racing. Hi, Aline. Marcos' voice was warm on the other end. Are you busy? I'm eating dinner, but nothing important. Patricia called me a few minutes ago, he said, getting straight to the point. I wanted to give you the news myself. Aline held her breath. So soon? And why was Marcos calling instead of Patricia? They're offering you the job, he continued, and Aline could hear the smile in his voice. You'd start Monday. For a moment, Aline was speechless. Joy and relief flooded her chest, creating an overwhelming sensation. That's wonderful, she managed to say finally. Really? So soon? Patricia wanted to do more interviews, but apparently you impressed her. She said you showed refreshing authenticity. Her exact words. Aline smiled broadly. Grateful Marcos couldn't see the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you accept for starters, he suggested with humor. Of course I accept. There was a brief silence, charged with unspoken emotions. We should celebrate, Marcos said finally. Are you free tomorrow night? Aline's heart skipped a beat. Was this a personal invitation, or just a kind gesture from a boss to a new employee? Yes, I'm free, she replied, trying to keep her tone casual. Perfect. I'll pick you up at 8. I know a place you'll love. When the call ended, Aline stared at her phone with an uncontainable smile. Not only had she landed a job that would let her help her parents and possibly resume her studies, but tomorrow she'd have a date with a man who, in just 4 days, had managed to awaken feelings she thought she'd forgotten. Because it was a date, wasn't it? The way Marcos had suggested it. The tone of his voice, yet doubts began to creep in. He was her boss now, technically. Was it inappropriate? And what would people say? A girl without a completed degree, from humble origins, going out with the millionaire CEO after landing a job at his company. The perfect setup for misunderstandings and rumors. But as she finished her dinner, Aline decided she didn't care. For the first time in a long time, she felt something good, something genuine was beginning in her life, and she wasn't going to let it slip away because of fear or insecurities. Aline had never been indecisive about her wardrobe. Practicality had always taken precedence in her life, and her limited closet offered few options to debate. But that night, her bed was covered with the few clothes she owned as she stared critically at herself in the bathroom mirror. Was this a date? Marcos hadn't specified, and she feared misinterpreting the situation. If she dressed up too much, she might seem presumptuous, too little disinterested. The dilemma made her feel like a teenager before her first dance, not a 26-year-old woman who just landed a respectable job. Finally, she settled on a simple burgundy dress, the only slightly elegant piece she owned. She bought it 2 years ago for a friend's wedding and had barely worn it since. It was modest but flattering, accentuating her figure without being ostentatious. At 7:55 p.m., her phone buzzed with a message. I'm downstairs, no rush. Aline took a deep breath, gave herself one last look in the mirror, grabbed her bag, and headed down. As she stepped out of the hotel, she saw Marcos leaning against his car, dressed in a dark suit without a tie, giving him an elegant yet relaxed air. When he saw her, his expression lit up in a way that instantly dispelled all of Aline's doubts. You look beautiful, he said with a sincerity that made her blush. Thank you, she replied, accepting the hand he offered to help her into the car. You look good too. Trying to rise to the occasion, Marcos commented with a smile as he walked around to the driver's seat. Ready to celebrate your new job? Absolutely, Aline affirmed, suddenly feeling light, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. I still can't believe it all happened so fast. Believe it, he replied as he started the car. Patricia never makes decisions lightly. If she chose you, it's because she saw something special in you. Aline glanced at him sideways. You sure it didn't have anything to do with the company's owner recommending me? Marcos shook his head, smiling. I've known Patricia for years. The last time I tried to influence one of her decisions, she reminded me her department worked perfectly well before I inherited the company and would keep doing so if I learned to stay out of it. Aline couldn't help but laugh. I like that woman. Everyone does, Marcos agreed. She's tough but fair. She'll teach you a lot. The restaurant Marcos took her to was on the rooftop of a historic building downtown, with panoramic views of the cathedral and the Zocalo. It wasn't ostentatiously luxurious, but elegant in a discreet, sophisticated way. The maitre d' greeted them as if they were expected, leading them to a secluded table by the terrace with privileged city views. "It's beautiful," Aline commented, genuinely impressed as a waiter poured water and handed the menus. "I thought you'd like it," Marcos replied. "It's not one of those places in tourist guides, but it has the best Mexican-French fusion cuisine in the city. The chef's an old friend." Aline scanned the menu, trying not to show her shock at the prices. Marcos seemed to sense her unease. "Order whatever you want, please. Tonight's special." "Special because of my job or something else?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Marcos looked at her directly, his intensity making her catch her breath. "Both," he replied with an enigmatic smile. "And because I want to see you in a context that didn't involve impromptu rescues or job interviews." "What context is this, then?" she pressed, needing clarity. "How about a first date?" he suggested, with a mix of confidence and vulnerability that was strangely captivating. "Unless it's too soon or too complicated. Considering you technically work for me now." "You work for Ashford Investments," she corrected, "which happens to have your last name, but it's a separate entity." Marcos laughed, visibly relieved by her response. "I see you've been thinking about this." "A little," Aline admitted. "It's an unusual situation." "It is," he agreed, "but I like it." The dinner unfolded with a naturalness that surprised them both. They talked about music. He preferred classic jazz. She had a soft spot for indie rock. They bonded over their love for Mexican auteur cinema and books. Aline confessed her passion for historical novels, while Marcos declared himself a devotee of Latin American poetry. As they shared a chocolate and chili dessert, Marcos watched her with curiosity. "There's something I've been intrigued about since I met you," he said. "You have an uncommon inner strength. Most people in your situation would have broken down." Aline reflected for a moment before answering. "My grandmother used to say life is like the ceramics she worked with," she explained. "When it breaks, you can throw it away or repair it. But if you choose to repair it, the cracks are filled with gold and the piece becomes more valuable. It's a Japanese technique, kintsugi. I've seen pieces like that." Marcos nodded. "They're beautiful. When my father lost his job at the factory and had to retire early, I saw my parents completely reinvent themselves. My mother started selling homemade food. My father learned carpentry. They never gave up. I guess I carry that in my blood." Marcos listened with genuine interest, as if every word mattered. "My father always said money solves problems," he commented. "But I'm increasingly convinced it just trades them for different ones." "Like what?" "Like not knowing who's with you for you and who's with you for what you represent," he replied, his tone more serious. "Or the constant expectation that you have to be perfect, infallible, because you have all the resources to be." Aline looked at him, seeing past the public image for the first time. "Is it hard?" she asked. Being Marcos Ashford, the heir, the successful businessman who multiplied the family fortune? He smiled, but there was a hint of melancholy in his expression. "Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a role, the guy who knows exactly what he's doing when, in truth, I'm often improvising like everyone else." "And now, are you playing a role?" she replied, half teasing. "With you? No. This is probably the most authentic thing I've experienced in a long time." The waiter approached discreetly to clear the plates and offer coffee, momentarily breaking the intensity of the moment. When they were alone again, Marcos shifted the topic slightly. "What do you want to do now that you have this job?" "Finish my degree, definitely." She nodded. "I want to complete my bachelor's, maybe study at night. The company has agreements with several universities," Marcos noted. "Flexible programs for employees. You could ask Patricia about it." "I will." Aline smiled, grateful for the information. "You know, I have to call my parents tomorrow. They would be so proud." "They should be. They have an extraordinary daughter." The compliment, delivered so naturally, made Aline feel a warm spread through her chest. It wasn't flattery or empty gallantry. There was a sincerity in Marcos's words that was irresistible. After dinner, they walked through the Zocalo, illuminated and bustling even at that hour. The cathedral stood majestic against the night sky, and decorative flags swayed in the gentle night breeze. "My mother used to bring me here when I was a kid," Aline commented as they walked. "She'd buy me a balloon and let me run around the plaza, while she soul crafts to tourists. Times were tough, but I have good memories. Childhood shapes so much of who we become, Marcos reflected. Mine was complicated. Boarding schools in Switzerland, constant expectations, my father's shadow always over me. Sounds lonely, Aline observed. It was, but it taught me to be independent. They stopped in front of an illuminated fountain. Around them, the city continued with perpetual motion, but in that moment for them, it seemed to pause. You know what's the strangest thing about all this? Marco said, looking at her with intensity. In less than a week, I feel like I know you better than people I've worked with for years. Maybe because we met under unusual circumstances, Aline suggested. No pretenses, no masks. Or maybe it's something more, he replied, stepping closer. Aline could feel her heart racing. There was something magnetic about Marcos' presence, something that went far beyond his status or fortune. It was the authenticity she sensed in him, the vulnerability he occasionally let slip through his confident facade. What happens Monday? She asked, voicing the concern that had been lingering in her mind. When I start working at your company, how do we handle this? Marcos considered the question seriously. Discreetly, I suppose, he replied finally. Not because it's something to hide, but because you deserve to be recognized for your work, not your connection to me. Do we have a connection? Aline asked with a small smile. We're building one, aren't we? He replied, gently taking her hand. Step by step, no rush. Aline intertwined her fingers with his, surprised by how natural it felt. I like the sound of that, she admitted. They continued their nighttime stroll, talking about everything and nothing, discovering unexpected similarities and differences that, far from pulling them apart, added a fascinating dimension to their budding relationship. When Marcos finally drove her back to the hotel, both knew something significant had shifted between them. They were no longer just a millionaire and the woman he'd helped by chance. They were Marcos and Aline, two people who, against all odds, had found in each other something they didn't know they were searching for. See you tomorrow? He asked as he walked her to the hotel entrance. I'd love that, she replied with a smile. They looked at each other for a moment, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Marcos leaned in and softly kissed her cheek, a restrained gesture that felt more intimate than any passionate kiss. Good night, Aline, he murmured near her ear. Good night, Marcos, she replied, feeling a shiver run down her spine. As she rode up to her room, Aline couldn't stop smiling. The life that, just a week ago, seemed to have crumbled around her now opened up before her, full of possibilities. A new job, the chance to finish her studies, and this extraordinary man who had entered her life in the most unexpected way. Entering her room, her phone buzzed with a message. Thank you for tonight, for being exactly who you are. M. Aline smiled as she typed a reply. Thank you for finding me when I was lost. That night, as she prepared for bed, Aline thought about the mistaken message that had changed her fate. Had it really been a mistake, or one of those mysterious twists life sometimes offers? Those coincidences that, in retrospect, seemed too perfect to be chance. Whatever it was, she was grateful. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful, excited about what the future might hold. And as sleep overtook her, her last thought was of Marcos and the way his eyes sparkled when he smiled just for her. Sunday dawned with a clear, unusually blue sky from Mexico City. Aline woke early with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The previous night with Marcos had been perfect, almost like a dream she was afraid to wake from. Her phone buzzed with a message. Good morning. Want to visit a special place today? I'll pick you up at 11 if you're free. Aline smiled, replying immediately. Good morning. I'd love to. I'll be ready at 11. She got ready with enthusiasm, choosing jeans, a light blouse, and comfortable shoes. She had a feeling Marcos had something more than a simple city lunch planned. At 11 on the dot, Marcos appeared in the hotel lobby. Unlike the previous days, he wasn't driving the Aston Martin, but a more discreet luxury SUV. Good morning, he greeted with a smile that lit up his eyes. Ready for a little adventure? Absolutely, she replied, noting his casual attire, jeans, a linen shirt, and light boots. Where are we going? It's a surprise, he answered, opening the SUV door for her. But I promise it's worth the mystery. They left the city heading south, chatting animatedly about music, movies, and childhood anecdotes. The ease of their interaction continued to surprise Aline. She'd never connected with anyone like this, let alone so quickly. After an hour's drive, Marcos turned onto a secondary road, winding through increasingly rural landscapes. "Are you kidnapping me?" Aline joked, watching as buildings gave way to fields and scattered houses. "If I were kidnapping you, I'd pick a more remote destination," he teased back. "Though I must admit, the idea of having you all to myself has a certain charm." Aline felt a pleasant warmth in her cheeks at the comment. The connection between them grew by the moment, as if they'd known each other forever. Finally, Marcos stopped the SUV in front of a large wooden gate, set into a stone wall covered in vines. There was no sign, just a discreet intercom he used. The gate opened automatically, revealing a gravel path flanked by ancient trees. "Where are we?" Aline asked, increasingly intrigued. "In Xochimilco, but not the touristy part," Marcos explained as they drove down the path. "This place belonged to my maternal grandmother. It was her refuge from the city, her connection to nature." The path opened into a clearing where a rustic yet elegant house stood, with large windows and a terrace overlooking a lush garden. Beyond, the glint of water hinted at one of Xochimilco's famous canals. "It's gorgeous," Aline murmured, genuinely impressed. "My grandmother was a botanist," Marcos continued as he led her toward the house. "She studied traditional Mexican medicinal plants. This was her natural laboratory, where she cultivated endangered species and experimented with hybridizations." Inside, Aline was captivated by the warmth of the place. It wasn't ostentatious, as she might have expected from an Asford property, but cozy and authentic. Carved wooden furniture, traditional textiles, walls lined with old books and black and white photos. "Do you come here often?" she asked, looking at a photo of an elegant woman with a group of indigenous people, all examining plants. "Not as much as I'd like," Marcos admitted. "My grandmother died when I was 15. She was the only one in my family who really understood me. After that, with studies abroad and my father's pressures, I drifted away from this place. Now I try to come at least once a month to remember who I really am beyond the name and the company." Aline looked at him with new understanding. He was sharing something deeply personal, a part of his life few likely knew. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked softly. Marcos looked at her directly, his intensity sending a shiver through her. "Because I want you to know me. The real Marcos, not the Asford heir in the magazines." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. Without thinking, Aline stepped closer and took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "I'm honored you'd share this with me," she said simply. They had lunch on the terrace, enjoying traditional Mexican dishes made with ingredients from the garden, prepared by the property's caretaker. The conversation flowed effortlessly, punctuated by laughter and knowing glances. Afterward, Marcos took her to explore the gardens, showing her the different species his grandmother had preserved and their medicinal uses. His knowledge and passion surprised Aline. "If you weren't a businessman, what would you have been?" she asked as they walked by a small greenhouse. Marcos smiled, as if she'd read his mind. "A marine biologist, probably," he answered without hesitation. "I've always been fascinated by the ocean, its mysteries, the life it holds. As a kid, I dreamed of exploring reefs and discovering unknown species." "What stopped you?" "Expectations," he said simply. "My path was set before I was born. The heir, the legacy's continuation. When my father got sick, any alternative dreams were definitively set aside." There was resignation in his voice, but no bitterness, which Aline found admirable. "It's never too late," she commented. "You could take it up as a hobby, at least." "Actually, I do," he confessed with a smile. "I have a marine conservation project on the Quintana Roo coast. Something discreet, personal." They reached a private dock where a traditional but smaller, more elegant genera than the tourist ones rocked gently on the water. "Want to take a ride?" Marcos asked. "This canal is quiet, away from the tourist crowds." Aline nodded enthusiastically. They boarded the boat, which Marcos navigated with surprising skill through narrow canals flanked by ancient floating gardens, remnants of pre-Hispanic agricultural engineering. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reflected on the water. The evening light bathed Aileen's face, highlighting her features in a way that left Marcos momentarily speechless. "You're beautiful," he murmured finally, anchoring Trajinera under the shade of a centuries-old awi-wadi tree. Aileen smiled, feeling a growing intimacy between them. They were alone, surrounded only by nature and the gentle sound of the water. "This all feels unreal," she commented. "A week ago, I was desperate, jobless, about to lose my apartment. And now you're here with me," Marcos finished, moving closer to her on the boat. "Maybe my grandmother was right. What did she say? That there are no mistakes, only paths we don't yet understand." Marcos gently brushed her cheek with his fingers, a touch so delicate that Aileen felt herself melting under it. "That mistaken message," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "What if it wasn't a mistake? What if it was exactly what was supposed to happen? I've never believed much in fate," Aileen confessed. "But this, us, it's hard to explain any other way." Their eyes met, and in that moment, all doubts, all apparent differences between their worlds, seemed to dissolve. Only there remained two people who had found something unique, special, transformative in each other. Marcos leaned toward her slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, but Aileen didn't move. Instead, she closed her eyes and met his kiss with surrender that surprised them both. It was a soft kiss at first, almost reverent, but it gradually deepened into something more intense. Aileen's hands found their way to Marcos's hair as he wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily, as if they'd run a long distance. "I wanted to do that since the first night," Marcos confessed, resting his forehead against hers. "At the cafe?" Aileen asked with a smile. "Actually, since I saw you in the rain," he admitted. "There was something in your eyes, your dignity, despite the circumstances." Aileen kissed him again, silencing his words, letting herself be carried away by emotion she'd never felt so intensely. The twilight found them still on the Trajinera, wrapped in each other's arms, whispering about dreams, fears, and hopes, sharing not just their stories but their hearts. "What happens tomorrow?" Aileen asked as they slowly returned to the dock, the night now settling over them. "Tomorrow you start your new job," Marcos replied. "And you'll be brilliant at it, I'm sure." "I meant us." Marcos stopped the Trajinera and took her hands in his. "We keep getting to know each other, step by step, no rush but no pause," he said with conviction. "We'll keep our relationship discreet for now, not out of shame, but so you can establish yourself in the company on your own merits. And when the time is right, we'll make it official. And if people talk, they'll say I got the job because of this." "Let them talk," he replied calmly. "The ones who matter will know the truth. Patricia already senses it and respects you for who you are, not your connection to me." Aileen nodded, reassured by his response. Later, as they drove back to the city under a blanket of stars, Aileen rested her head on Marcos' shoulder. A mistaken message, a wrong location, and yet she never felt more exactly where she was meant to be. "Tomorrow, I'll cook dinner for you at my apartment," she said suddenly. "Nothing fancy, but I'm a good cook. My specialty is the mole poblano my grandmother taught me." "I'd love that," Marcos replied, kissing her forehead. "I can't think of a better way to end the first day." When they reached the hotel, Marcos walked her to the entrance. This time, his goodbye kiss wasn't on the cheek, but a deep, promising kiss that left them both wishing the night wouldn't end. "Until tomorrow," he whispered. "Until tomorrow," Aileen replied. As she rode up to her room, Aileen felt an absolute certainty blooming in her chest. What had started as the worst day of her life had transformed into the beginning of something wonderful, a fortunate mistake, a wrong message that had reached exactly the right person. And as she prepared for bed, for the first time in a long time, Aileen didn't fear tomorrow. On the contrary, she looked forward to it with excitement, with hope, with a sweet anticipation of a future that, though uncertain, promised to be extraordinary. Because sometimes mistakes aren't mistakes at all. They're unexpected doors to destinations we didn't even know we were seeking.